The walls stand like a monument to society's failure, a monster of concrete and barbed wire, grey and indifferent to the tropical sun that beats down on it. To the average citizen driving along the nearby highway, the state prison complex is a blur in the corner of the eye, an uncomfortable but distant thought. It is the promise that evil has been contained, that predators have been caged. But that promise, like so many others, is an illusion. Prison does not destroy evil. In some rare and terrible cases, it merely refines it, distills it, and gives it a new and unexpected kind of power. It was into this melting pot of discarded humanity that a man named Solomon arrived years ago. He didn't have the physique of a gang leader. He didn't have the cold, blank stare of a serial killer, nor the tattoos that served as a resume in the underworld. Solomon was a soft-spoken, nearly invisible, middle-aged man, and that was his genius. While others imposed themselves by force, building fragile reputations on fear and violence, Solomon devoted himself to observation. He spent his early years as an anthropologist in hell, mapping the complex ecosystem of that place. He learned that the real currency of prison was not force, but need. The need of a guard with a sick son and gambling debts. The need of a powerful drug dealer desperate for news of his mistress. The need of a young inmate, terrified and lonely, who would do anything for a little protection. Solomon became a master at identifying these needs, and so he became a problem solver. His rise was silent, built on a foundation of favors. He never asked for money. He never made direct threats. He simply offered the solution in times of greatest desperation. Legal advice that outshone the public defender. A message that reached the right person in the favela. A medicine that mysteriously appeared in a sick man's cell. He did not create servants. He created debtors. And a debt of gratitude in the code of that place was perpetual and unquestionable. Within a few years, the Invisible Man had become the most stable power within the walls, a king without a crown whose power was not seen, but only felt. With loyalty and obedience assured, Solomon made the prison his headquarters. His cell, inspected daily, contained nothing but a thin mattress, a Bible, and philosophy books. It was the cleanest and most dangerous place in the entire state. The real work was done elsewhere. The visiting rooms, with their noise and formica tables, were his office. His lawyers, men in expensive suits and serious faces, were his executives. The visits were not to discuss appeals or habeas corpus. They were planning meetings. Protected by inviolable professional secrecy, they took orders. Solomon's words were few, precise, and cloaked in legal jargon. A witness review meant an intimidation operation. A seizure of assets was the order for a kidnapping. Family members were his logistics network. An elderly mother, visiting her son, would leave with a note the size of a grain of rice hidden in the seam of her purse. A wife, in an emotional embrace, would receive a tiny cell phone chip in the palm of her hand. Normality was the perfect disguise. Instructions were passed on amid conversations about a grandson's grades at school or an aunt's health. Inside the prison, communication was even more ingenious. A network of kites, notes tied to strings, made of shredded bedsheets, traveled between cell windows, ensuring that Solomon's orders reached his managers in each pavilion within minutes. The reach of his power was absolute. One day, dissatisfied with the loyalty tax in a neighborhood, Solomon gave a single verbal order to one of his lawyers. The order was broken down and passed on to 3 different lieutenants in the outside world, each receiving only a part of the plan. One provided the men, another the logistics, the third the escape route. None of them knew who the others were. 2 nights later, a series of coordinated fires took over the businesses in that neighborhood. The message had been delivered. The next day, the tax was paid double. The police investigated, but found only petty local criminals, pawns who were quickly put down. No one would ever connect those fires to a man who, at that very moment, was attending an evangelical service in the prison yard. In the Homicide and Personal Protection Division, Chief Sophia spent her nights awake. She was different from the rest of her colleagues. Where they saw isolated crimes, she saw a handwriting. There was an intelligence, a discipline, and a boldness to the crimes that plagued the city that haunted her. The robbery at the cargo terminal, the disappearance of a witness, the coordinated arsons. They were too perfect, too silent, too professional. Her theories about an invisible architect were the butt of jokes at the police station. "Sophia is hunting ghosts again," they would say. She dove into the files, sifting through old cases, connecting events that no one else saw. Frustration was her constant companion. All her suspects were dead ends. They were disposable pieces on the board, and the king remained in the shadows. The turning point came where she least expected it. During the interrogation of a low-level suspect, a young man arrested for one of the fires, she pressed him. The young man, terrified, trying to defend himself, said that he had only fulfilled a mission that came from the other side of the wall. It was nothing, it was just slang. But for Sophia, it was like a thunderclap. "What wall?" she asked. The young man fell silent, realizing his mistake. But it was too late. Sophia's gaze changed. The hunt was no longer on the streets. The ghost she was looking for was somehow inside the very system that was supposed to fight it. The chess game began. Sophia knew that any false move would alert her opponent. She began a quiet investigation into the communications leaving the prison complex. But Solomon's network was nearly perfect. The lawyers were shielded by secrecy. The families were either too loyal or too terrified to speak. Her attempts to infiltrate an informant ended in tragedy, with the man being accidentally killed in a conveniently timed riot. Solomon, for his part, felt the pressure, and he relished it. For the first time in years, he had a worthy opponent. He began to play Sophia. Knowing that his lines might be monitored, he sent false orders, leading her team on weeks of fruitless pursuit. It was a duel of minds through layers of concrete and bureaucracy. Sophia sensed his presence, a cold, mocking intelligence, and her obsession with unmasking him became personal. The downfall of an empire is rarely caused by an army, but rather by a single crack in the foundation. In Solomon's case, the crack was hubris, the favorite sin of kings. To execute a particularly complex plan, he needed to ensure that one of his men on the outside had an active prepaid cell phone. Disregarding the usual methods, he ordered one of his lawyers to top up the account online using a frontman's credit card. It was a tiny act, a $20 transaction in a sea of millions, but it was a digital error. Sophia's team, which obsessively monitored any activity linked to the suspicious lawyers, spotted the transaction. It was small, almost nothing, but it was the loose end. By pulling on that thread, they tracked down the front man, who, under pressure, gave up the payment scheme. They got to one of the carrier pigeons, who kept a record of dates and amounts. From there, the house of cards began to crumble. Sophia finally had a tenuous but traceable trail of evidence that led from the streets to the door of the law office, and from there directly to the visiting room of the prison complex. Operation Domino was launched at 4 in the morning on a Tuesday. It was a silent police masterpiece. No sirens. Dozens of teams simultaneously arrested, the lawyers in their luxury apartments, the family members in their modest homes. Solomon's network was decapitated while he slept. The last domino piece was the king himself. Solomon's cell door opened. He wasn't asleep. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, as if he had been waiting. Sheriff Sophia entered, accompanied by 2 federal agents. Their eyes met. A universe of unfought battles passed between them in that silence. There was no triumph on Sophia's face, only the weariness of a long hunt. There was no fear on Solomon's face, only the final recognition of a game well played. He stood up, turned around, and put his hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs closing was the only noise to break the silence. Solomon was transferred to a maximum security federal prison, a concrete tomb in the middle of nowhere, a place designed to break spirits. He was subjected to special disciplinary regime. 22 hours a day alone in a white box. No visitors, no letters, no contact. The king was finally in exile. His empire had crumbled. But in the police corridors and in the cells of that state, the story of the king of the cell became a legend. Organized crime in the city suffered a blow, but it did not die. Other leaders, less brilliant, more brutal, tried to fill the power vacuum he left. And Sophia, at her desk, looking at the now empty investigation board, was haunted by a question that would keep her awake for many nights. Had they won the war, or just a battle? Had they cut off the head of the serpent, or had they simply forced it to hide in an even deeper hole, where it would now have years, decades of silence and solitude to plan the next game? Could the system that allowed an unlikely king to build a throne in prison really contain him forever, or had it merely turned him into a martyr, a myth, an eternal echo in the corridors of power?